Hey, good morning. Welcome to Advocacy and Hope. My name is Amy Post, and as always, be your host this morning. I appreciate your time because you have a lot of choices, and that is one thing that we can't get back, and your time is really appreciated. I've appreciated all the support. Advocacy and Hope rolled out last fall after some huge, I think, downfalls in my life, but really figuring out where I should be positioned. So this has been a really cool opportunity. So thank you for joining us again. We have an incredible guest today. Jayson is just an incredible individual, incredible human. I've met him through watching him on different podcasts, and we have a few mutual friends, but really interested in what he brings to the table, because I think everyone out there listening right now will find definitely one, if not numerous pearls of what they can do to really kind of improve some things in their life. So Jayson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, grateful to be here.
Well, thank you. So Jayson Gaddis is a husband, father, author, podcaster, speaker, CEO, founder, and I think one of my favorite executive coach, but a human behavior specialist and relationship expert. This really touched my heart on the relationship portion because what you do is so powerful, and I can't wait to just dig in a little bit more. So, Jayson, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sounds good. Hi, everyone. So I'm a husband. I've got two kids, 15 and 13, and I'm a relationship geek. I was a sensitive kid growing up, so I was always tracking the family dynamics and the social dynamics on the playground, and I was easily hurt and missed, and so I developed a superpower somehow of tracking all the things, and that makes me a great coach now today. But it was painful back then. Like a lot of us grow up not feeling understood and feeling like people don't get who we really are, and we got to conform to the big people and the church or whatever the hell we're into. And I kind of left my true self behind in exchange for belonging and friendship and acceptance. And that came at a really high price in my late teens and early 20s with a lot of drug and alcohol use, a lot of failed relationships, which would eventually lead me to graduate school to study relationships and study psychology and study myself. And I met my wife there, and it was kind of the first real relationship I feel like I was in at age 30. And I just began to use and see my partnership as like a spiritual path. And so I just now teach people everything I've learned and what I learned from working with people and what people teach me. I just try to share it and help.
I love it. I think that is fantastic. It's really interesting because I think just being able to be vulnerable and talk about your feelings, but the fact that you tracked these social behaviors at, this young age, that's really interesting. And so what were you finding even as a young kid when you were really kind of observing and watching everyone?
Yeah, that for whatever reason in my family, I had a great family, but they just didn't get me. And the sensitivity, kind of emotional side of me as a boy wasn't really allowed, is kind of the message I got. So, my dad was a pretty intense guy and athletic, and, he kind of taught me to be tough and play sports and perform, which got me acceptance. It got me friends, but again, it came at a price. And so I sort of watched over time all these people, all of us, including myself, just kind of abandoning themselves to fit in and belong, and just how painful that is, that we do that. And, there's the good news is we can recover that. We can we can stop continuing to betray who we are in exchange for love or connection. And we can instead bring all of us to a relationship and find out if we'll belong.
Yeah. And I think too, it's, I do see so many people out there trying to prove themselves and be something or someone that someone else wants them to be. And why do you feel that that's what's happening? Is it just that everybody is looking for love and acceptance and belonging, and they're just willing to kind of go along and have everyone else figure out who they are? Or, what does that
Yeah,
look like? It's pretty intense.
it's intense. I think for a lot of us, it does start in our families, but certainly as teenagers, we, absolutely like social connections is like the most important thing for kids. And I always say people, or sort of what people taught me over time is that people trade again. They trade who they really are for belonging, and that comes at a big price because we're social mammals. We're wired to connect. We're wired to belong. It's one of the worst things you can experience as a human being is to be outcast from the group
Hmm.
and to feel humiliated and rejected. And so we'll do
Yeah.
whatever we can really to belong and fit in. And people, adults, it's less common as adults are like, no, that's not really me. But it's like, well, if you're single and you're dating, just look at your dating behavior. Sometimes you'll leave your true self behind because you want the person to like you. So you won't really share all of you, and
Hmm.
you'll hesitate to share all of you because you don't want to be rejected, or when you're trying to get a job, it's very similar. So, it's appropriate to be socially, just understand social norms to fit in and belong. I get that. But the whole point of a deep friendship or deep family or deep partnership is to really bring all of us out and find out if we're going to be loved, and also to find out if we can love another person, because usually what they bring is, often uncomfortable, or we judge it, or it triggers us into our old wounds. So it's a cool path for personal transformation, but it's a lot.
Mhm. It is, and I can imagine, and I know just from myself of just taking some of those hurt feelings or emotions into the future, and each relationship, if something triggers you, it may not be what happened right then, but it's just from things that we've sort of kept inside and bottled up or locked away. I mean,
Yeah.
wow, it's interesting. I don't know if you would agree, but I think with hiding ourselves, our true self, and who we actually are and who we want to be, never then allows us to ever even wake up at any point and really know our purpose or who we really are, into adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. We're too busy trying to get acceptance and belonging.
Yeah.
And I always say there's a kind of a true self and a strategic self that start to emerge as children. And the
Mhm.
strategic self always wins because the strategies we develop are all about belonging and
Mhm.
reducing pain and reducing
Yeah.
fear and trying to get the big people to behave in ways that are less and less hurtful and more good, basically. So we're funny, we're cute, we're invisible, we're quiet. Whatever our strategy is to make our family okay, that becomes kind of a habit, and that's becomes who we think we are. And the good news is, in a long-term partnership like marriage, as adults, you can't keep hiding that those authentic parts. They're going to come out, and that's what makes marriage such a crucible and so hard and also so rewarding.
Hmm. So tell us a little bit about who you coach. Are you coaching mostly married couples, or what does that look like? Who comes to you, for the coaching or for the expertise?
Yeah, so years ago, I became a therapist, and I was seeing couples mostly. I worked at mental health centers. I did a lot of work here in the community and families. I did worked with a lot of teenagers, and what I learned over time was, gosh, everybody's got relationship issues, and it seems like even all these mental health problems stem from some kind of relational traumas. And so I started to specialize in relationships, and then I eventually was couples. And the thing I loved about couples is, one partner usually is leading the way and the other partner's kind of dragging their feet.
Hmm.
But if it goes well, the partner dragging their feet gets on board and they're like, oh God, okay, wow. Yeah, I'm starting to see it now. And so because my practice got so big and full, I couldn't help that many people. So I started to do groups. and eventually create courses. And so
Nice.
most of what I do is I run courses and trainings for everyone on how to do this part of their lives better, how to communicate better, set boundaries better, own your needs better, understand how your family of origin is playing out in the now, in the present. So I'm a teacher now, and I coach, part-time, a few people here and there, because I love it. And it's usually couples, but sometimes it's an individual who feels lost and they've lost their way. They're stuck in their strategic self and they're trying to get back to their true self and find their purpose in life. And then once in a while, I'll work with a family.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I can only imagine how fulfilling it is to really kind of dig in and be able to help these individuals or these couples and families, because I mean, look at our divorce rates, look at the rates that, people split, and, the grass isn't greener on the other side. I think that, like you said, so many things come from communicating well and just learning how to communicate differently, or looking at the situations through different lenses with a different perspective. And how difficult has it been working with some of these relationships and working through trying to get each side to sort of see the other side and communicate and set boundaries, because every one of those things are difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's like you said, it's very rewarding, especially if we can help people have breakthroughs and actually change their lives. And it's incredibly frustrating sometimes and painful, because some people, they come in because they want help, but then they behave in ways like they're right and the other person's wrong, and they're really stuck in really an earlier developmental stage. I'm kind of a developmental psychologist in some ways, because I see human development across time, that if we get hurt as kids a lot and as infants, our development is stunted in certain ways. And so you get into an adult relationship and you act like a 5-year-old, or you think your partner acts like a 5-year-old. That's why, because you actually never completed your developmental steps when you were 5. And so your emotional literacy is compromised. Your fear trauma response is really intense. In your family, you learn to survive by never taking responsibility and always blaming someone else. That's what you're going to do as an adult. So the adults who have, not only difficult childhoods, but began to develop characterological strategies that got rewarded, those people are very hard to work with. And even if they're saying, I want help, they don't even know they're defending against the thing they're trying to get help with. So marriage, again, is probably one of my favorite places to try to help, because you can't hide. It exposes all of the places where people want to bypass their development. They don't want to grow up. They want to stay a child and point the finger and be right. And it's like, that's not going to get you a good marriage.
No, I mean, I can only imagine the different types of people that you get to work with. I'm sure you have to quickly kind of understand what personality they have, but yet they're walking into a situation. How do you know they're even being honest with you or themselves? They're in such an interesting situation, and change is the hardest thing for us, or hearing things that are hurtful or we don't want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a lot. We do hide out, some of us, because we're so ashamed, or usually it's shame, but some of us are very defensive and defended around our heart, for example, or being vulnerable. But if you can't be vulnerable in a long-term partnership, it's going to be not a very good partnership. You can have one, but it won't be that fulfilling for you. So there's this just tremendous opportunity to grow and develop ourselves in the context of family or a life partner. And because it just exposes all of the earliest attachment injuries. And I think it's a really cool path. It's not for everybody, but if you do want really good, deep, profound relationships, you're going to need to grow and develop yourself.
Yeah. So with those relationships, the couples that you've worked with, I guess, how long are you needing to spend with them? Does it really, do you map that out for them in the beginning of kind of, this is what it looks like, and give them an overlay of kind of what it's going to look like each week, month? How do you
Yeah.
do that for?
Yeah. So again, if I'm coaching someone, my wife and I have a series of principles we operate from. She's a couples therapist and coach as well. And we obviously practice living this stuff in our own life. And it depends. Like as a general rule, people with less childhood trauma tend to get this stuff quicker because they have to develop themselves less. People who have bigger injuries in their childhood, bigger gaps, bigger deficits, more trauma, their road is a little steeper in an adult partnership because there's just more triggers going on and more unknowns and more acting out, and behaviors that are hurtful. And like, you're acting from a wound, for example, and you don't have enough awareness. And so it spills out onto your partner and it creates more messes. And then on top of that, most of us, because we never got a class in school on how to work through conflict and repair effectively and how to communicate through challenges, we're most of us are kind of flying blind and winging it. And when we wing it and we don't actually learn how to do this effectively, most of us are just behaving from younger places that we know that it's like the default setting. And that's just not very effective. So for, the longer, it'll take couples longer to do the work and get to good places because they've stockpiled, they've never learned, and they have a lot of baggage from their childhood, and they have all this unresolved piles and piles of stuff they haven't dealt with for years. That's going to be a steep road. And that's why a lot of people are like, fuck it, I'm just going to, skip this and just get divorced because I don't want to deal with the pile. The pile's too big. It's overwhelming. But the problem with that attitude is the next relationship you're going to enter, the pile didn't go anywhere. It's still there. And so now you have double to deal with. You've got the new partner who might feel great, but as soon as it gets hard a couple of years in, you're going to have that big pile sitting there that you never dealt with. And on top of that, the new person's pile, their pile. It's like people just don't get it, really. They don't know what they're getting into when they get married. And so I always say, never, ever get married unless you're willing to like dig deep and do the work for the rest of your life.
So I have a couple different things, and I won't ask them all at once, but I've notated a couple things. So that was very interesting, and it makes complete sense. If you're not willing to deal with your baggage and let that person in, that second marriage is never going to work, because then you've already had one failed marriage and you're probably even perhaps more jaded and more closed off. But do you feel that that's why the second marriage has even less success rate than the first?
I think that's a good point. I don't know really, but that's a good speculation. I think the people who do thrive in a second or third marriage or fourth marriage, it's because they've learned the lessons, the painful lessons from the first and second or whatever previous relationships, and they've understood a lot about themselves. They've self-reflected and they're like, wow, I made a mistake there. I didn't take responsibility there. I was kind of young and blamey there. And gosh, I'm not going to do that in this next relationship. And so they can absolutely be more successful. But I would say those are the only people that really go to the next level, are people who learn and apply themselves.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, we always hear that, you can never stop learning. It doesn't matter what it is. We put so much emphasis in our career because, of course, it gives us usually a paycheck. It pays the bills, and we're motivated to do it. And I think that, like you said, that there aren't any classes that were given on, relationships or marriage or having children, a family.
Yeah.
I think we've done it to ourselves. I think the world is broken in so many ways, but that is one of the highest ways that I see, and you possibly do as well. It's just, we aren't given the tools that we need to succeed. And then sometimes it possibly is too late when, the first marriage has failed or those different relationships have failed. So,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And there's these days, it's like, yes, that's true. We weren't, most of our parents, we got what we got by just watching them. They
Mhm.
didn't actually say, hey, here's how you repair conflict. Most people didn't get that download from their parents. And then school, there's no class. And so we didn't get it there. And sports, you're taught to kind of compete and win. It's win lose. And there's so many models that are not that relational in our upbringing. But now we have access to everything we need to be successful, and we have it for free. So at this point, there's no, like, my parents didn't have that access. And so
Yeah.
I have a lot of compassion for, gosh, they didn't have any tools, basically. They didn't know any better, and there wasn't a lot of resources. There might have been a couple books, but that's about it. Now it's like you have everything within seconds available to you. So there's kind of no excuse now to not figure this part of your life out, because you can watch, even if you have no money, you could watch hundreds of hours on YouTube for free and learn how to do this part of your life better, because there's some really good content out there that can help us,
Mhm. I think I can't remember who I've heard it from on different podcasts or things that I've watched, but one of the best pieces of advice I remember hearing recently in the last few months, actually, my son was on a podcast that I had introduced him to, just really helping kids kind of get ready for their future
Mm.
and, being confident and asking questions. And the host, all out of nowhere, just said, the best advice I can give, as you move forward and you meet someone, is the moment that that maybe that person is the one, get into counseling quickly, get
Mm.
into relationship counseling, learn how to work with each other just like you would a business partner. Or and he was just really putting some cool context into it, and it made sense. It made sense for
Yeah.
me as an adult, and especially it was super cool for these kids that were I think they were probably 16 to maybe 24. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's great advice. Yeah, relationship coaching, counseling, get online and look for, premarital advice stuff, because I was driving down from the mountain with my son the other day from a bike ride, and we drove past, like, seriously, like 6 weddings, because it's so beautiful here. There was all these great wedding sites from the mountains on down to where we live. And I sort of am a little cynical, because I'm like, good luck, good luck, good luck to all these, they're just blissfully like, oh, everything's great. And I'm like, it won't be great in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Add a lot of stress, job loss, health problems, kids, and it's going to get very hard for most of those people. And they're not prepared. So that's why I'm always like, don't get married unless you're prepared.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really, really good advice. It's blatant, it's honest, it's raw, and I think more need to hear that. They have absolutely no idea what they are getting into. And when I launched my first book this year, and really started talking about our past, and I think I was telling you a little bit about it before we started the podcast. I mean, our life was ripped out from underneath us, and I think so many people have something that just shattered their world.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, you have to not only deal with the day-to-day, but deal with your world turning upside down. And I'll tell you, it was tough on my husband and I. I mean, one, we didn't see each other for several years because I lived in the hospital and he lived at home with my son. And we were going through just traumatic situations with my daughter and decision making that, oh my gosh. So I'm sure you just hear so many things that people are working through, but you probably also just the normal, just how do I live with somebody else and their little traits, let alone what they have carried in baggage from their past.
Yeah, you said it well. How do I just live with a person? Let's just start there, because that's hard enough already, for years on end. And then on top of that, add in the crisis that comes in that none of us can predict, whether it's a cancer diagnosis or some autoimmune disorder or a death in the family or financial loss or bankruptcy. I mean, whatever, like we don't know what's coming. And so that the stressors that come from the outside can either bring couples closer together where it fortifies them into an even more solid team, or they can't figure it out and they move apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting when, and I've definitely, my husband and I have been married 17 years, and, we've been through a lot more than I think a lot of people have, but I can honestly say this is just one of the best things that people could do, because I mean, the world one, we're not getting healthier. The crisis, right. The situation is really just intense, and, not even knowing those small tools of how to communicate and set boundaries and work with each other. It's so imperative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. I'm curious, what, if you could point to just one thing that made you and your husband stronger over the years with all the health challenges you guys have had, is there something that you'd say was the thing? I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. I was the one in the family that advocated. I was there every day in the hospital with my daughter, and, really looking for other ways, and just my mind just never stopped. And my family wasn't really that way. And my husband really just kind of the denial sets in. And I was probably a little bit in my own bit of denial, just trying to manage everything. But when we finally started coming together a little bit, I needed him to trust me. And I think for each of us just to trust each other in making decisions that were really important for our family and not putting each other in jeopardy. But then it was communication. I mean, we really had to learn how to communicate. And then I had already, studied boundaries, and in my early 20s, read several books on setting boundaries. And so we had to then kind of set new boundaries of protecting us and protecting our family and our time together. And really just, it was just a hurricane. And so, I mean, I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but it certainly thrusts you into, you're either going to figure it out, or your world is really going to come down. And I remember, each of us never stopped fighting for the other one when the other one almost was to give up and just not knowing which direction to go. We never gave up on each other. Yeah. It's not that we always got along or always agreed, but we at least heard the other one out on what our process was. And, my husband had to realize that I'm a very strong person, and this just kind of set me into motion to where I could really advocate and think on my feet and utilize some tools that I hadn't ever utilized in my life. And I draw it to a huge purpose that God has placed on my shoulders. And I didn't feel it a burden any longer. At first, I felt it was awful. We didn't ask for this to come into our life.
Yeah.
And I had to reassure my husband that, we were on the same page, and we needed to figure out how to be on the same page, no matter if we were in agreement or not. And so it was desperate. It was defeating. And then it was beautiful, because once we really started getting on the same page and understanding what the other one was feeling and how they were maneuvering through this really, really dark, terrible time, we really just started understanding each other a lot better. But it took, we're 10 years in, and we're still working on understanding each other.
I bet. Yeah. So cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've worked with, so many different individuals, but I keep pulling my thought back to, you probably have those individuals, of course, that have had, I think we've all had, something happen in our childhood at some point that maybe is holding us back, or we're carrying that baggage. But like, have you worked with couples or those in relationships that you just sort of knew that you weren't going to be able to counsel them together? Or do you suggest them to get separate counseling as well as working together? Or kind of how does that work in those really tough situations of just a lot of baggage and a lot of shame, perhaps, coming with the other one maybe finding out?
Yeah, as a general rule, again, I'm about working with the couple is more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have two willing people, it's going to be more efficient than two willing people going off on their own camps with their own counselor, therapist, coaches, because they're talking about the other person without them there. So the coach, therapist person has a very
Mm-hmm.
subjective view, actually isn't seeing the whole picture. So it's better as a general rule to just, if it's a relationship challenge happening between these two people, to get them to come together with someone skilled that can help them through the impasse and to help them build a repertoire of tools and agreements and things that are going to set them up for success. That's always just more efficient. But you can't, if you have an unwilling partner. Some of us are with people where the other person's like, hell no, I'm not going to work on it. And then you're kind of left on your own. And that's when you need an individual person to help you sort this out so that you can decide if you're going to stay with this kind of person who's totally resistant, or if you're going to leave because they're kind of stonewalling you, or they're just clamping down and they don't want to own their part in a fight, for example. That's unworkable, in my opinion. And a lot of people stay in those kind of relationships, sadly, because they don't want to be alone and they'd rather just have someone, even if they're treated poorly, which is sad to me.
Yeah, it is. And have you had those couples that maybe met with you and then had to take a step back and really think about it? And then did they come back to you? Have you had, situations where they really just took an opportunity to think about it, or did any talking at home, or realize that they really loved each other and they were willing to kind of work through it, and then maybe at that point move forward? Or do you just never see them again?
All of the above.
Okay.
And so, again, I've helped people. I often help people end their relationship because it's so dysfunctional and it's just not working. And usually it's the case I was just describing, where one person really wants to try to figure it out and the other person has no interest. That's often headed into the direction of it's going to end. Because I always say to people, look, I don't care if you stay together or not. That's not my agenda over here. My agenda is that the two of you need to be true to who you really are. Because why would you be in a relationship where you have to compromise and leave yourself behind to get love? I just won't support those kind of relationships. We do have to sacrifice. Of course, we have to negotiate. You're sharing your life with someone, so it's not all about you anymore. So of course you have to be flexible. But if you have to betray yourself to be in a relationship, that's where I draw the line. And so I help people get divorced or break up, and I also help people have extraordinary partnerships and go to the next level, and then everything in between, right? And then some people just come and they're like, they can't do what I'm asking them to do, and they leave, and they never, I reach out, hey, you guys okay? And I get nothing back. They're gone.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting when my daughter was diagnosed. It was, I believe, the first full after 24 hours that we were there, and we had sort of a liaison or a mentor that met with me, and just gave me a stack of just, here's kind of what's going to happen, all the procedures, just kind of here's your life in one folder. It was just extremely daunting. And her second sentence was, Amy, children die, and I think it was like 80 or 90% of couples get divorced or separate. So you're just going to have to get prepared. That lingered in me forever. And finally, over the years, I just began wondering so desperately, what made them split and what kept those together. When in the hospital, I met who is one of my absolute best friends now, and we had never met before, but she had a child. Her daughter was diagnosed with cancer a couple of months before my daughter was, and we talked daily. I mean, we were each other's lifeline, and her daughter passed away 1 year after she was diagnosed, and my daughter lived. And I remember just feeling the guilt and, not talking to her for a while. And then even to this day, 10 years later, she and her husband are still together, and they have one other daughter. And not that they don't have difficulties, but they stayed together. And I started recently just kind of asking a few questions, and then asking others who didn't stay together, what was it?
Right.
What pulled you apart? And the number one reason that tore these individuals apart was financial.
Mm.
And I thought, oh
Wow.
my gosh, I totally get it. And not to kind of veer this off, but I mean, it's one of the things that we don't do in life. We don't prepare for what we don't expect. And I understand that's probably pretty gruesome. People are like, I don't want to think negative all the time, but yet you got to spin it and just be prepared in life, because hardships are going to come up. And if it's financial, or if it's, no commitment, or whatever it is, I mean, maybe some things are capable of getting through, but others aren't. What do you see? And that was just kind of me looking in
Yeah.
and talking to a lot of couples, but I really needed to see, like, the grass isn't greener on the other side. Like, your child was still sick. There's nothing we can do to change that. But why did they have to split? Like, what?
Hmm.
They could not come to an agreement, and then the finances just weren't there. And it's always left me baffled. But do you see something in particular, or a couple of things in particular, that really just, the couples just, they aren't making it due to a few reasons?
Yeah, I do. So I have a question about that, that you're talking about, that, and a comment that it might help. I don't know. Is I wonder if the couples you've talked to, when they cite the reason financial, is it um, the real data driven financial kind of problem, like we don't have enough money, or our health insurance won't pay for it, and then the couple becomes, they're at odds about that. Um, or is it that the couple didn't know how to talk about finances effectively?
Mhm.
So, because what I
Yeah.
see in my world is it's usually the latter. That, so if it's a
Mhm.
financial issue that is cited as the reason people are getting a divorce, it's most often that they didn't know how to talk about money effectively. They never did. They never learned how. It was always contentious. Um, Both people got triggered and just couldn't figure it out, and they might have gotten help, but their communication skills stayed the same and
Mhm.
didn't improve. And people just kind of bear down, like, on their opinion and their position. The inflexibility is what creates separation and divorce. If you can stay flexible and you actually are interested in the other person's perspective, and you are willing to put yourself in their shoes and empathize with their experience, and they're willing to do the same, those people can communicate through just about any challenge, whether it's sex, finances,
Mhm.
health concerns, big crises, family drama, whatever. So
Mhm.
it's the good communicators and the people that become better communicators that tend
Mhm.
to be able to face almost any challenge. So I just wonder,
Mhm.
right, in those cases, if that was the issue, or if it was truly some sort of just financial thing and they were great communicators.
No, I think I agree with you completely. The individuals that I've spoken with the couples that stayed together, seem to have just a better communication. The family dynamics seem to be more stable. And there just seemed to be something in these couples that stayed together, that they had had a better relationship altogether. Things
Hmm.
just, they communicated better, they were committed, they really listened to each other. I think they were able to kind of put themselves in the other person's shoes, and they had a more mature way of thinking about things. And I do believe some of the situation, and it's tough. And we had excellent insurance, and I can't imagine somebody that, didn't have good insurance to be able to cover. I mean, we were still, pounded with bills.
Oh,
And you never know where to put your finances. And does one person quit their job, and who is that? And then does that person have the health insurance that stays, and then that person can't be at the hospital? And there's all these really, really heavy
wow.
adult
Yeah.
conversations that have to take place. And then what does that look like? And I understand wholeheartedly that we somehow are sort of already set up to be able to handle certain things, and some people are just not able to handle
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking poorly about anyone. I just had some sort of gift of being able to jump into the hospital and do what I did and advocate and push back and change protocols and really, run dummy scripts to know what our out of pocket would be and talk to the insurance. And, I just knew how to work these things. And then my family just kind of, everybody had their head in the sand and nothing was happening. Nothing was going on. And it was just a different thought process.
Yeah.
And I think money is absolutely no different. It's probably one of the highest things because it's kind of a free for all at that moment of just, my gosh, how are we going to come together? But those are not conversations that I wish anyone to have because they're very difficult to try to figure out. And then I think there is a lot of resentment that can build up quickly. And that's very, very hard because you expect that other person to understand exactly what you're feeling and thinking and what's happening. And we can't. We have to give ourselves and other people grace.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to a couple things here that are important. One is just your resiliency, your capacity, your sort of warriorship around meeting a big, like in what seems like an insurmountable challenge that's like in you, right? For whatever reason. And some people don't have that capacity built in. They're more fragile, or they, their psychology is not, their mind isn't that strong. They tend to get overwhelmed easily or point the finger at someone else and not take any responsibility. Who knows? But I've noticed that over time that the people that tend to be successful in their relational life tend to be the kind of person like you. They're just willing to meet big challenges and apply themselves and learn. Because some of us do collapse under pressure. We want to run and hide. We want someone else to do it for us. It's understandable, right? Everybody's got a different constitution. But that's, yeah. And I do think, though, that, again, if we have two willing people who can work together, because we can do more together than we can alone, right? And so meeting a big health crisis like you guys did, it's the truest test. Can this partnership survive the test? And it's like a boat being out in the middle of the ocean in a little dinghy, like the two of you are in the dinghy. And your relationship, which is the boat, withstand the storm, the hurricanes, the sharks, the waves, the sleepless nights. Can it do that? And not for everyone.
Yeah. And I think it's so hard to know how that other person is going to react in certain situations when you've, first met them. But I mean, you probably meet a lot of couples that, knew each other for long periods of time before they got married, maybe some that didn't know each other very well at all, and got married. I think there's all types of different situations that can make it, but you've gone through some really good points. So what are some of the coolest stories, or what is, one of the coolest stories that, or memories, or of a couple that you've worked with that, I mean, you always remember, or you always talk about, or maybe is an example for those that just don't think that their marriage can survive, or it's not worth it?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell two that maybe short ones that paint really different pictures. One that ended, and one that was, is now a thriving partnership. So one guy I worked with him alone, and then I said something was a little fishy about how he was describing everything, and him and his wife couldn't figure it out. And I said, well, just bring her in and let's see if that helps. And so he brought her in, and we worked together for a few sessions. And I kept confronting her, and he was like just really wanting to make it work. And she's like, you deserve better. She kept kind of making these excuses and like kind of like almost like, you should leave me. Well, it turns out that she was having an affair, and that's kind of why she was taking this sort of complacent position, and he was really wanting to work on it. And once that got exposed, of course, the relationship ended, and he was able to kind of get on with his life. And it was super painful because he really, really, really wanted it to work. And of course, when you find out someone's having an affair for a decade, she was having an affair for a decade, it put everything into perspective. And then he had to look at how he was complicit in that, and how he fell asleep and didn't see that happening at all, which is what I was working with him on, so he could get empowered, right? Because it's like, it's easy to just point the finger at that person and be like, you cheated on me, it's your fault. And on some level, that's kind of true. But if he doesn't learn anything, then he's going to get into another relationship and be as vulnerable as he was before.
Yeah.
So that's one story. And then another woman came to one of our courses. I never worked with her privately, but she came to one of my 9-month trainings. And after a very painful divorce, and she's now a single mom, and she does the course and starts to see everything she was doing wrong in the previous relationship and all the mistakes she made, because everything I'm learning, teaching her is like, look, this is kind of how to do it better. And she's like, oh my God, like, where was this class, 10 years ago? And she worked her butt off for 9 months straight to learn everything I laid down. And within a year, she met a new guy. And actually just yesterday, she sent me a Facebook message, ironically. And, she's thanking me again, like, I can't believe this is the kind of relationship I've always wanted. I'm having it now. And it's not so much what I did, right? It's what she did. She just became a student and said, I'm going to get this part of my life handled, and I'm going to figure it out. And she did. And now she's in a thriving partnership. Granted, it's in the early, stages, so it's easy to say, but she's so much more equipped now, and her daughter's doing really well. And so, it's a lot's possible when we apply ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Great stories. Yeah, and two very, very different stories. It's super cool. I mean, I'm sure it feels great to see those individuals really kind of grow and thrive. I'm sure it's not fun to kind of see them realize what they did wrong for so long, but yet, we all get another chance. And I think being able to really see it is pretty cool, and accept it.
Yeah. And you just said a very important point I want to underscore, which is we all get another chance. And it speaks to the notion of, a lot of people think a perfect partnership should be free of mistakes, and we're not allowed to like fall on our face and be a total jerk sometimes. And that's not the case at all. We actually need to have the view, and the attachment research shows this, the work of Ed Tronick, et cetera, it's about reparations and repairing mistakes. So I hurt your feelings, and I'm like, oops, I hurt your feelings. And we clean that up and we learn how to repair that. That actually builds the strongest foundation possible. And the same is true with parent-child relationships. It's not being the perfect mom or dad. It's that you're going to mess up. You're going to neglect your kid. You're going to yell at them. You're going to do something kind of mean-spirited, or you're going to shut down, and like, you're not going to be able to show up for your kid. That's all normal. The difference between insecure families and secure families are, secure families know how to repair mistakes. And that's the same with adult partnerships. Secure, strong adult partnerships know how to repair mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just being able to give ourselves grace and give the other one grace, and we're not perfect and we have bad days, but just being able to come together. I mean, I saw that through so many years of my husband and I. We were angry, we were fearful, we were scared, and we would take something out on each other and just cry. And you're going to have those days. It's, we're normal, we're human, and things happen and things affect us. But I think it's being able to get through it, and the other one understand that you're on the same team.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, Jayson, thank you so much for being here today. I have really looked forward to this for many, many months, and I'm so glad we were able to really just kind of come together. I think we could have talked for hours. I could have asked so many questions, but this is something that is so important. I mean, our future hangs on this, being able to communicate well. And like you said, set those boundaries and give each other grace. And man, just be able to thrive and be happy, live a life that we're happy in, I think is huge. I think there's a lot of unhappiness out there. So we'll tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah. Anywhere on all the social media handles, I'm at Jayson Gaddis, Jayson Gaddis, Instagram, YouTube, etc. And then we have a podcast, the Relationship School Podcast, and a great course if people want to start. I start everybody with the same course, which is a communication. Just go to relationshipschool.com/CBS. Because if we can just do this better, dialogue and communicate and listen, we got a leg up for whatever challenges come.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to end. So Jayson, thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. And as always, I thank you for your time. We're here to help just really give you the ability to advocate for yourself, for others, and know that there's hope through, those struggles that you're going through. So thank you again for watching. And I'm Amy Post, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.